Andrew Cuomo now getting the rock star's treatment. Rolling Stone putting the New York governor on the cover of its latest issue in a piece called Andrew Cuomo Takes Charge. Cuomo getting national attention for his daily coronavirus updates. He mixes facts and data with empathy and emotional appeals like this.
I am glad in some ways that we're first with this situation, because we will overcome. And we will show the other communities across this country how to do it. We'll be there for them. We want them to be there for us. And we will be there for each other, as we always have been.
Cuomo's popularity, it is soaring. A recent poll of New Yorkers showed the governor has a 71% job approval rating. Just as frame of reference, 2 months ago, it was below 50%. And when people are asked about his handling of COVID, nearly 90% said they like the job that he is doing. And nationally, a majority of Democrats who were asked who they'd want to have as their presidential nominee, they would make Cuomo as their top choice instead of Joe Biden. Well, joining me now, Jesse McKinley, the Albany bureau chief at the New York Times. Jesse, you know, obviously you've covered this forever, but that the governor is a media darling, given for any that knew him. Everybody knew him to be brilliant, but I remember nicknames that I can say on TV, one of which was Prince of Darkness. And yet he is the right man for the moment. And I've found that even on bipartisan sides, people look forward to his briefings to get an idea of not just what's going on in New York, but also nationally, how to get their hands around this.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, I think it's a very good way to describe it. He is actually meeting the moment kind of head on. And it's a good example of his kind of unique political skill set kind of matching up with the crisis at hand. You know, he is known as a micromanager. He is known as very hands-on, sometimes to the point of annoyance. He is known as, to be not completely polite, he's known as a control freak. And I think in this moment when people are really scared and really upset and concerned about their health, about their future, about their economic status, that sort of control freak dumb plays pretty well. I think it's also in kind of contrast to what's coming out of Washington, where President Trump's press conferences, whilst sometimes informative and sometimes, confident, have had mixed messages. And I think that people right now are looking for kind of a steady, kind of consistent message, and Cuomo seems to be offering that up.
A question to that, both in terms of style and also distinctions. People might, in this interview, finally put a face to the name Jesse that they hear probably a half a dozen times. He intentionally comes back rather than avoids questions you'll ask, even if it wasn't answered concisely the first time, with data and with facts. He consciously, I guess, from the very beginning said, you know, I didn't create this thing. I'm just going to lay out, even if they're tough, some of the facts in front of us. And consequentially, for whatever reason, it was embraced. But yet at the same time, he's doing this nuanced dance with the president. Yesterday, he certainly pushed back with the idea that the president, through empirical power, can decide basically taking over states' rights. But he's also used a glove when he could have used a fist against the president, because he thought it wasn't best to always make him an enemy when he needed some of the aid from the federal government. I thought it's a little bit more complicated than people make it, how from one day to the next he takes a different approach.
Yeah, I mean, particularly in the last 24 hours, it has been a much more combative approach. I think the move by Governor Cuomo and 6 other governors in the Northeast to basically say, okay, we're not getting enough guidance out of the feds. How can we actually start to move towards restarting the economy? I think that offended the president. He made that pretty clear during his White House briefing last night. By the same token, I think that Cuomo has been very careful about not criticizing Trump by name. And keep in mind, these two guys have known each other for decades. They both kind of grew up in the same city and a political environment in the city. New York City politics and New York State politics are famously brutal. And they both know how those games are played. And I think that kind of pairing back and forth and you see it from the president as well. I don't think he goes after Cuomo quite as hard as he has gone after people like Governor Whitmer from Michigan. Cuomo very much needs Trump. He needs the federal government to help him out in practical, day-by-day, nuts and bolts response to the crisis. And Trump, by the same token, sees these poll numbers and sees Governor Cuomo being popular and knows that if Cuomo wanted to lay a licking on him politically, he probably could at this moment.
One of the most surprising things, I would bet almost, and you're closer to this than me, but even to Governor Cuomo himself, is how he has been viewed in emotional terms, because he's always been close to the vest, even though he's been a national figure. I mean, obviously the Cuomo name, not just in New York, but he was Secretary of HUD for a time. He married a Kennedy. There was a page 6 element to that as well, Sandra Lee, the whole thing. But to that end, there's always been this Shakespearean thing with the Cuomos. His father, Hamlin and Hudson, Willie, won't he ever run for president? Never did. Andrew Cuomo's ambitions never been questioned, but I want to play for our audience, not just him and his brother, their nightly tete-a-tetes on CNN that are funny, but what he said about his dad and where he got, I think, most choked up.
And there's a gentleman who I still look to for guidance and for leadership and for inspiration. He's not here anymore for you. He's still here for me. But he said things more profound and more beautifully than most other people ever have. And one of the things he said that is so appropriate for today, we believe in a single fundamental idea that describes better than most textbooks and any speech that I could write what a proper government should be. The idea of family, mutuality, the sharing of benefits and burdens for the good of all, feeling one another's pain, sharing one another's blessings, reasonably, honestly, fairly, without respect to race or sex or geography or political affiliation. That is New York. It is that closeness, that concept of family, of community. That's what makes New York, New York.
There has been a theme of family, Jesse, throughout every single press conference about the daughters he can't see, the mother he's worried about, the brother he'll go back and forth, referencing his father. Not to be naive, but I believe it's a genuine article, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that this event has affected the governor. It is very easy for people that cover him, as I have for 6 or 7 years now, to get cynical about his political motivations. He is a consummate political animal. He's been doing this for 40 years. He certainly knows all the angles. He certainly, in Albany, controls a great deal of public policy, as well as kind of the backroom kind of negotiations. But I do think that in this case, he has found an emotional streak. And I think in part that is because it has touched home. His brother Chris was diagnosed with the coronavirus. I think it's in part that his 2 of his 3 daughters have been living with him here in Albany as this crisis has unfolded. I think it's in part because his mother, Matilda, is of an age that she could be vulnerable to this. So I think all of those elements have kind of coalesced in kind of a very emotional response for him. And keep in mind, Richard, as well, we're talking almost 11,000 people have died in New York State at this point. That is an enormous catastrophic loss of human life. And I think you'd have to be pretty hard-hearted to have that not affect you. And particularly the long hours that he is working, and that the healthcare workers are working, and that people around the state trying to confront this are working. I think that all seeps into a rawness and an emotionality that people are seeing and probably responding to.
Jesse, I mentioned some polls, not just approval ratings, but even on a national landscape, people, I think, crave competency right now. They want to have a faith that somebody at some governmental level is not putting politics first. What do you think? He'll have a chance if he wants to be certainly part of a cabinet of Biden, one would think, if he wanted that. He's done that before. Would he want to be part of a presidential ticket if it was even so offered? Where are Cuomo's ambitions? Forget what he said. What do you think he'd want to actually leave Albany?
I think that's a great question, and I think it's a huge question that a lot of people are asking. I think in terms of 2020, that window is probably closed. I think Joe Biden's been pretty specific and pretty consistent that he wants a female running mate. And he is obviously going to be the Democratic nominee, barring some unforeseen events. But I think in terms of higher office, I think that certainly, depending on the outcomes of the 2020 election, Andrew Cuomo would be a credible contender and probably on a short list of who people would be looking at in 2024. And just to go back to your previous point about the kind of Shakespearean elements of this, don't forget that Mario Cuomo, his father, was governor for 3 terms. And his ambition could include a 4th term, which, without putting too fine of a point on it, would best the old man. You know, he would be able to say that he got elected to a 4th term, whereas Mario only did 3. I don't know if that is any part of his calculation, but at least amongst people that kind of follow this very closely, it seems to be kind of one of the palace intrigues that kind of kick around.
You rightfully pointed out just the huge number of New Yorkers we've lost to this. But Albany also lost someone that was very close to this program, but was part of an institution up there, Richard Brodsky. And the assemblyman, you never had to guess where you stood with him. He pretty much made his opinions very clear always. But as much as a person, he comforted the afflicted and afflicted the comfortable. He went after a lot of corporations, but he always defended Albany and the institution of the legislature as much as anyone I met.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, Dick actually put out a CD a couple of years ago that we kept on the wall. It's in a place of pride here. He will be sorely missed. He was a dogged fighter for not only his constituents when he was in the legislature, but then after he got out of the legislature, he was an advocate for fairer elections. He will certainly be sorely missed by people that care about government.
Well, Jesse, I appreciate your time as always. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more RFL after this.